A live look in now at the House of Representatives, where Congress debating the Democrats' latest stimulus bill. This one has a $3 trillion price tag. Multiple reports are saying that actually Speaker Pelosi is having a hard time getting enough votes. And even if she does, Republicans are already saying this thing's going to be DOA when it gets to the Senate, if it gets that far. Now, despite the trillions of dollars Congress and the Fed has already pumped into the economy, tens of millions of people are still struggling to make ends meet. And on top of that, inexplicably, the Trump administration is working on limiting access to food stamps. It wants to impose additional work requirements that could dump up to 700,000 people from the program, as people obviously are having a tough time keeping, let alone getting a job. Let's bring in our guest, former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. He is also the author of The System, Who Rigged It and How We Fix It. Secretary, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for asking me.
You know, rather than getting into the morality or the ethics of it, which I think you and I would agree on some of these things from the administration that are nowhere near there, just from a basic economics 101 perspective, the idea of cutting off food stamps or cutting off basic aid to people right now that are starting to go below the poverty line, it doesn't make economic sense. Forget about just passing the smell test of what's right and wrong.
It makes no economic sense at all, because if you don't have money in your pocket, even to buy the basic necessities, you certainly are not going to go out and buy anything else. And unless people buy, the economy can't get going. Consumer purchases account for about 2/3 of all economic activity in the United States. So this is not only cruel on the part of the administration, this is silly in terms of trying to get the economy moving.
To that end, I want to play a soundbite. This from earlier today, Governor Cuomo responding to this new blue state bailout that's been furthered by not just the president, but the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who basically says, why are we going to be giving money to states like New York or to California or New Jersey? Why are we subsidizing liberal ideas? This is what he had to say.
They have to deliver federal funding to the state of New York, and I want to hold them accountable. And I do not believe they're going to want to come home and defend the fact that they cut police, firefighters, teachers, nurses, and doctors after those people just were designated heroes who saved lives during the pandemic, which happens to be true.
You know, we've shown the math that a state like Kentucky is getting $30 billion more than they put in every year, and a state like New York putting more than that amount back that it never sees from the federal government. But forgetting the equities of this, we have seen this before. I remember after 9/11 and after Sandy, Republican majorities didn't want to give the money because it was happening to a blue state. But they should be careful what they wish for, right? If, as McConnell says, New York, California declare bankruptcies, what would that do to the American economy?
Well, first of all, it's silly and it's unfair and it's illogical to single out certain states as being Democratic states or Republican states. If this pandemic has taught us anything, we're all in the same boat together, and we all need help. The states are on the front lines in this pandemic. It is police and firefighters and nurses and doctors and social workers, and they are reliant on the states. The states don't have any money, and it's not just Democratic states. You've got 36 million Americans, many of them in states that are headed by Republican governors and legislatures, and they are in trouble. I mean, these people don't have enough money to put enough food on their table or pay the rent or the mortgage. And we know that most Americans are living and were living before they lost their jobs, paycheck to paycheck. And so for the Republicans to say we're going to do nothing and we are just going to let this happen is not just unfair, it's politically stupid.
And for the Fed chair to basically say now's not the time, to think small here, go big, I thought that was really telling. To that point, it is interesting, don't you think, that all of a sudden, even though we were, before the pandemic came on the radar, we were trending to be $1 trillion running in terms of a deficit. Now, all of a sudden, folks are getting religion about debt and deficits when they couldn't have cared about it before. I mean, hypocrisy is pretty thick here.
The huge, it was a $2 trillion essentially tax cut for the wealthy and for big corporations, passed in December of 2017. And the Republicans, when asked, can we afford it, they said, of course we can afford it, because let's not worry about the deficits. Let's just pretend deficits don't matter. And then suddenly, when you're in a pandemic, and people are desperate, not corporations, not wealthy people. Wealthy people are doing just fine. But we're talking about average working people. To say we can't afford it is just, it makes no common sense. It violates common sense. Of course we can afford it. People cannot actually pay the rent. They cannot undertake economic activity unless they have some money. This is now the time when you want to have deficit spending.
As they struggle on the Hill figuring out what the next package is going to look like, we do have the benefit about seeing what worked and didn't work about our initial attempts, and also look to Europe, for example, and other places on how they put money in people's pockets most efficiently. What's the best way to do it if it's not the way we've seen out of Washington so far? And is the money going to the right people?
The best way to do it, and the Europeans have done it well. They haven't all done exactly the same, but what they are doing is saying to companies, we will pay for your payrolls. We'll pay for your employees. If you keep them on the payrolls, keep them on. We're not going to pay you for your shareholders. We're not going to bail you out. We're not going to pay your executive salaries, but we will pay your payrolls. And that has worked very well. That has kept unemployment down. It's a very efficient way of doing it. In the United States, we tried something called the Payroll Protection Plan. That's what it was named. And it was not nearly as efficient as in Europe because it was done through the banks. And the banks decided to give preference to their major customers. The banks themselves took $10 billion for themselves, even though they were exposed to absolutely zero risk. The Small Business Administration was overwhelmed. They were part of it. Why don't we just do it like the Europeans do, just very simply? The Treasury knows how to do this because we have a tax system in which taxes are withheld from people's paychecks. You just reverse that. And you just, instead of withholding your pay for taxes, you just put pay in people's pockets. And that could be done very quickly, very, very effectively. And we could actually keep businesses going for the purpose of making sure that their people, their employees, were maintained.
You know, I saw a piece you wrote recently, Robert, about there's a 4-point plan that you suggest the president's trying to do. And it is scary if it's true, but I got to tell you, I think it's hard to argue. You said one is intentionally, he's trying to remove the income support so people have no choice but to go back to work. Then you say, hide the facts. And he said out loud in the last couple of days, the biggest problem we have is we do too much testing. The more testing we do, the more we learn we have people positive with COVID, as if intelligence is dangerous. And then pretend that it's about freedom. We saw the scary pictures out of Michigan. He's encouraging people with Liberate and all the rest here. Get out there. Don't listen to your leaders. Just go back out there. You've got nothing to fear. And then finally, shield these businesses from any kind of liability. So it doesn't matter, OSHA is just a 4-letter word at that point. Whatever they do, whatever protections they choose not to even take, they face no kind of exposure on the downside. It does feel that the first and last instinct is about the re-election and the health of the country be damned, and even the long-term health, economic and otherwise be damned. This is about November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd.
Well, here's the great tragedy, Richard. 87,000 Americans have died over the past 10 weeks. And we know that figure would have been much, much smaller if the president and his administration had acted earlier. And it is very, very clear. You just connect the dots. Donald Trump is worried about being reelected. He wants to get the economy going. He doesn't seem to worry about the public health risks. I mean, this is the most cynical kind of ploy politically I've ever witnessed. These certainly are unusual times, but how honestly can a president in good faith tell people it is safe to go back to work when we know that death rates are going up, especially in those parts of this country right now, that are opening up?
Robert, I appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everyone, when we come back, the president, he keeps blasting his own intelligence agencies and, of course, the last guy in his office, Barack Obama, over the Russia probe and Michael Flynn. After the break, former CIA officer who says Intel and Obama did exactly what they're supposed to do. He'll join us.